today I'm going to go over production capacity planning and calculating how the system calculates the process to figure out what's available for the resource, whether that's a machine, a person, a work center, doesn't make a difference. How does the system figure that out, and what all does it take into consideration when it tries to figure out how to build the capacity and then how to assign the jobs into those time slots? So the first thing is, what are the inputs that go into production capacity? A lot of things go into making up what can be done in the system. Company and site configuration needs to go into there. The production calendars and how we set up our production calendars also goes into what machines or what resources are available, when can suppliers be accessed. The resource groups and the resources, our equipment and our people. And then what is finite versus finite horizon versus infinite settings? We'll talk about those and take a look at them. Then I'm going to go into how scheduling blocks work inside the system. Next, we'll take a look at queue and move time and how this works with the resources. The time it takes the parts to sit at a work center before we get started on them, how long the parts have to sit at a work center before they can move off, or time for paint to dry, parts to cool down from heat treating. And then we'll take a look at just basic operations as well as subcontracting. Subcontracting is where we send the parts out. How long are they going to be out at the vendor? So all of these inputs go into figuring out or helping Epicor's logic figure out when is the resource available, when can I put a job on it, how much time is available that day. So these inputs are going to flow into what we consider a capacity plan for our production scheduling time. So under the company settings, in the company configuration area, under the production node, under all modules, we're going to have how is load relieved in your system. And this is going to be based on quantity, based on time or hours, or is it going to be based on cost if you're using projects and project tracking? The other area that's going to come into this is our scheduling options. And can I reschedule an operation that's already started? Yes or no? These settings determine, hey, when I run the global reschedule, is it going to move a job that's already gone through setup, is already underway? Next one is allowing scheduling before today. And as I tell most of my clients, if you have a TARDIS, you can schedule before today because you can travel through time like a Time Lord. If you don't, scheduling before today may be a difficult concept because you can't go back in time and start that job a month ago. So what Epicor would do would be forward schedule it or bounce it and say, starting today, when can I have the parts off of this if I can't go back in time? The next ones, I'm going to kind of bounce over the prompt to allow scheduling of an end engineered job. I have not really seen anybody, and I'm sure Bruce will pipe in here, where I haven't seen someone who turns around and tries to schedule an unengineered job. I could see this possibly with projects or large jobs where we want to plan what we do know about it before the whole thing is engineered. Michael Cromer has asked a question, is there really any benefit to allowing scheduling before today? If you have the ability to travel back in time, by all means you can do that. Some people want to see that jobs, yes, are still coming out when they're needed, not when it's capable. So I have seen people say, no, we want to allow scheduling before today just so that, yes, we can meet the deadline. We need to know how many hours we're over or behind the gun. Anything on the calendar scheduled prior to today is an overload. The last two checkboxes here under company configuration is enabling scheduling debug log. This is a great tool. I saw a question come in for the Stump the Chump about where do I find the logs, how do I know what to search in logs, and we'll be talking about that here in the presentation. But enabling the scheduling debug log also puts additional information into the scheduling log when either the MRP scheduling or the global scheduling or even just simple job scheduling are run. One of the things that I found in 2022 is that when I run just scheduling a job, Epicor still creates a log file for it. Now, in past versions of Epicor, you didn't get a log file for manually scheduling a job. It was only when MRP or global scheduling ran. Now you get a log file anytime the scheduling engine runs, and it lets you know why it picked what it did and where it put it. The last one here is include extra details in the log. Now this makes the log file really verbose and a whole lot larger. This will eat up space if you're running MRP with 200,000 parts. It's going to take up an awful lot of room on the server. So this is not a setting I would recommend turning on and leaving that on your system. When you find that you're into, I can't figure out why Epicor scheduled this where it didn't make sense in the log files, go under the company configuration, turn this on, then go back, run your scheduling. Now take a look at the log file and you should have the extra information. I wouldn't necessarily run this with that setting for a mass like global scheduling or MRP. But these settings under company configuration are definitely going to flow in to how does my system work and how is it going to figure out what's available. Now, the load relief, I know I talked about quantity versus hours as being the two major factors here that I see people using, and it's a recalculation of the schedule that uses what's been reported to the job and calculating the amount of time needed to reschedule the remainder of the operation. So if the operation's already reported parts were made or we've already put time into it, how much remaining time is needed when the schedule engine resumes or goes to reschedule it. And it takes a look at that. It doesn't just say, hey, this operation still needs 10 hours as it was originally designed for because it hasn't been completed. It'll look at what has been completed and relieves the load based on those MES or time ticket entries that went into the system. On top of the company configuration, we also have the site configuration. This does not impact as much of the schedule, but does have some play into this. I did make a note, there was a third-party scheduling, and I don't know if Rocky Soft is still out there working with Epicor, but there are outside third-party softwares that do assist into the scheduling with the system. Some tie directly into Epicor, others are external that where we need to pull the data in. Under the site configuration, there's also send-ahead scheduling, and this comes into play when I create a job. Say I have an operation 20 that needs to make 100 pieces. After the first 10 parts come out, can those move on to operation 30, or do I have to wait until all 100 pieces are done? If that job can send batches of parts or parts based on hours or a percentage of the production, if those can move on to the next operation, the subsequent operations can start earlier in the schedule, allowing for a shorter time for the job to be in WIP. So the send-ahead scheduling is set up here under your site settings to make sure, do we include the completed quantity and hours in the calculation for the send-ahead? So again, even though I'm relieving load, I also want to make sure send-ahead also adheres to that if I'm going to use that feature. On top of the site, we're going to have the production calendars. And this is a fun discussion that I have with many people. Naming your production calendar so that it makes sense to you. We can put a code in there. In the Epicor training database, you'll see a 5D28, which is a 5-day, 20-hour calendar. While the calendar is set up for a default 24 hours, the hours that are selected on the 5 days total up to 20 hours a day. The question is this production time or is this efficient production time? Meaning if I have an average across my plant of 80% efficiency from all of the work centers, do I set the calendar up for 80% of the time so that Epicor doesn't schedule me to create at 100% knowing I'm never going to attain this value? That means come Tuesday morning, I'm behind the 8 ball already. So setting up your calendar to allow for some global efficiencies is a good plan for people when you're trying to do the proper capacity planning. You may have a 24-hour calendar, but you're not getting 24 hours of productivity. Let's go ahead and adjust that calendar so that you're not behind the 8 ball on day 2. The next one is toggling the non-working days. And going into your calendar, unfortunately, there's not a simple way to copy this from one year to the next, but you do want to turn around and toggle the days off that you know the plant is going to be shut down or you're not working. If we turn those days off, the scheduling engine is not going to put work on those days. Now, in conjunction with that, that will also, if we tie a calendar to a supplier, it's going to adjust my purchasing suggestions if the supplier is shut down. And as I mentioned, people, if you try and get a product out of China during New Year's, it's not going to ship on time. So by putting in the Chinese New Year on a calendar and linking that to the vendor, you'll see your suggestions being created so that they go out before the holiday hits. Now,
hey,
Kristen asked a question here. Yes?
That was what I was going to do.
Not a problem. On my previous slide here, does send ahead need to be checked in order for the function to work? Let me see if I can hop back a slide here for Kristen. So by turning around and including my send ahead completed hours and quantity in the calculation, this should not impact that send ahead works. This just means that, yes, I want to look at the load relief based on these settings. There are other areas that we'll talk about making send ahead work and making sure it's configured. There is a goofy part, or a part that I say that's goofy. Send ahead only works when the operational relations are start to start for scheduling. So if I have a finish to start or any of the, I want to say there were 3 selections. We'll take a look at that screen here in a moment. But the operation relation needs to be start to start in order for send ahead to be followed.
And we've got another one from Tim Coopers. How do you tie calendar adjustments to a specific supplier?
That we'll definitely go over then, Tim. I'll go ahead and throw that in here when we take a look. In the calendar setup, when you turn around and create a calendar, there's a way to turn around and mark the non-working days. Same thing for adjustments for a specific supplier. I have a heat treater that only picks up on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I want to turn off Tuesdays and Thursdays. So now I can turn around and make sure that my orders are adjusted for that as well. Under supplier maintenance, we turn around and link the calendar to the supplier. Now the suggestions will turn around and follow based on the calendar that's linked to them. If the supplier is not linked to a calendar, it's going to follow your default production calendar that's linked in your company configuration. If I have days that I need to turn off, I would have to turn those off on that calendar, and then that would be the calendar that I attach to the supplier. One drawback with having multiple calendars, you have to maintain these calendars moving forward. Just because you put the holidays on the main calendar doesn't mean it's going to copy to all the children calendars that are out there. You need to maintain each of these. I believe there was somebody in the community that had written a DMT and a BAQ, so it exported the calendars, allowed them to edit it in Excel, and then import them into the calendars moving forward. Don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure that was up on the Epi users help that was posted. In addition to the calendars, we have the resource groups and the resources that are in those groups. So I'm going to focus on the resource groups here. The finite and the horizon. The resource itself is marked as finite. The horizon is marked on the group. So how far out do I take this finite scheduling for this resource group? Some groups I may want to only have a 7-day horizon, others a 2-week, others a 90-day. Depends based on the resource group that you're working with and how far out you want to take that finite horizon. By default, if we don't have finite horizons or the finite checkbox on the resource set, it's defaulting to an infinite schedule. That may not produce the results that you're looking for if you're looking to see the load balanced across your resources and managed by the system. It's going to think first resource in the group can handle 400 hours on a Monday. It's not going to balance it. So some resources should be finite, some should be infinite. I generally talk with a rule of thumb. If a resource has a physical constraint to how many hours in a day I can run it, that goes finite. If something has an infinite capacity, such as temp labor doing assembly work, I can call an agency and say, hey, send me more people to do this. So I can kind of increase my capacity without a problem. You can't call up Mazak and say, send me another CNC on Tuesday. While they would love to try and do that, it's just not going to happen. So that would be more of a finite capacity for a resource. As you add resources to a group, Epicor will update the number of resources. Some versions of Epicor, this gets out of whack, and there is a conversion program to resync and recalculate these. That occasionally does need to be run to keep this in sync. If you find that your number of resources does not add up to the active resources within your group, bingo, we have to run the conversion program to clean that up. The scheduling blocks is how many resources can be run at the same time. So when I go to schedule this, think of having 3 welders. Well, I want to take up 2 of my welders to run at the exact same time. I can spread this job over 2 welders and get it done quicker. Scheduling blocks allows me to turn around and say, hey, run this over 2 resources at the same time, thereby shortening the time it takes to get through.
We've got a question from Randy. Is that conversion program given to you via support ticket through Epicor?
Actually, it's in the conversion programs that are out in the system. If you go through the list, you would find it in the list. Look for one that calculates resources in the description, or dump the description to Excel and just look for the word resource in that column. That'll filter them down a little quicker for you, Randy. The queue time and the move time. Queue time is how long are the parts going to sit in the work center before somebody starts work on them. Think of the move time as how long is it going to take a forklift to come by, pick up the pallet, and move them to the next operation? Or how long is it going to take the paint to dry, the parts to cool off out of heat treating? This is time that previous versions of Epicor, you couldn't put that into the capacity plan. Now we can put that in there. There is also a checkbox to use the calendar for the move and queue time. Do I need to have the calendar adhered to for my production hours per day? Paint can dry overnight. If I have a 16-hour calendar assigned to paint, well, the other 8 hours in the day, paint can dry. So I really don't have to listen to the calendar for, say, 4 hours of paint drying. It doesn't have to run it can run in the evening. It doesn't have to run during working hours. So if the operation can continue regardless of the calendar hours, that's when we go ahead and turn these checkboxes on and off. Now, a couple things, let me double check here. The finite capacity is calculated, very detailed scheduling results. When the engine determines the load to place against the jobs, it takes into account the existing load for each operation on that job method. The resources cannot be scheduled above their available capacity per day. So if I said there was 10 hours, you're only getting 10 hours of production there. That is the concept here for finite scheduling. Infinite, wide open. I can overload a work center or resource without any problem. I see a lot of people using this as a default and then manually moving the jobs on their schedule to build their work plan, or printing up their list view of the resource scheduling board and then moving them in Excel and not using Epicor to do this. By setting up the finite and infinite settings correctly, you can get the system to handle at least 80% of your scheduling nightmare. It's not going to be perfect. We're always going to run into an overload or a backlog. Hey, the supplier didn't show up on time. These are always going to happen, and we have to adjust for those. With the infinite, you can manage the overload by shifting the load, increasing capacity, and the shop load records are created to provide that overload visibility when the scheduling engine runs. So I know I didn't have the checkboxes in our presentation here, but just want to make sure also on the moving queue time, you know that it doesn't have to adhere to the calendar. Couple areas I'm not going to hit here because it requires the advanced production scheduling module. Not everybody has this, but it's the daily production capacity. How much can the resource do in a day? And then do I need to schedule for that maximum? So even if the engineer said I can do 1 million pieces per hour, if the daily production is only 500,000, I can only run that machine for half an hour. The scheduling engine will adhere if you use that daily production capacity and override what the production standard is that was set up in the engineering. Again, that requires the advanced planning and scheduling APS module in order to be able to use that. The resource goes a little bit more finite than what the group is. Now, there is a checkbox to just say, hey, use the group's values for most of my defaults. There are a few extra areas here. Can I split the operations? The length of time that's assigned to each scheduling block depends whether the operation can be divided or split. So painting cannot be broken. You have to do all the painting and drying at the same time. You can't split that one. So the operations are not really contiguous. If they are not contiguous, they can be split. Next one says the daily production capacity, like we had on the group. This is going to require the APS, but it's going to limit the resource again to the total production or concurrent capacity. It's not going to turn around and adhere to what's in the production standard in the job routing. Now, we do also have a couple extra fields here, the minimum overload, and do we even inform the overload system? So if I have a scheduling overload of 5%, do I even want to notify the scheduling person that, hey, you scheduled 20 minutes too much today? That may be an area where I say, forget it, allow that to slide. But anytime I'm more than 10% overloaded, then I need to know that I got to reschedule or work some of the jobs around in there. So you don't necessarily have to throw everything at the overload system to, hey, red flag, we got to watch out. If it's a small percentage, I wouldn't even worry about it. Again, we want to get the bulk of the jobs moving through. Got a couple of questions here that came in from Dan Ramirez. Operations that require more hours than can be done in a day, does it just take the remainder and use part of the next day and then schedule the next job to start midday? That's exactly what it's going to do. So if I have a job that's going to take 12 hours and I only have an 8-hour production day, it's going to take 8 hours on one day and 4 hours on the next. It's not going to turn around and take 8 hours on one day and 4 hours on a day 3 days later. It is going to make sure that it's contiguous and running constantly, because you can't turn around and necessarily tear down a machine just because it's the end of the day. Michael Cromer's got a question here. Is it possible to split on a shift change? That I think the scheduling engine's going to choke on. Epicor scheduling engine, some of the versions have a problem with shift changes. Or they don't look, if we're doing capacity scheduling, that, hey, I've got someone in second shift that can continue working on it, so it only scheduled the job for one shift of a 3-shift day. I know some of the versions have addressed this or tried to fix that. I would almost say right now, double check the setting, run the scheduling engine, change the setting on the resource and run it again to make sure that, yes, your version or patch doesn't have one of these issues with shift problem. Matthew Heck is wondering, can we do a survey question, Fred, on how many people use infinite versus finite?
Give me a few seconds.
And Tom Polkinghorn has another question. Where can I pull the load from one operation that spills into multiple days? The job operation table would be probably your easiest way to find that, because the scheduled start date is going to be earlier than the scheduled end date. So that tells me that it went over multiple days. Otherwise, you can look at the scheduled start hour and the scheduled end hour and see exactly how many hours did it schedule for it. But if the date value changes, you know it went over multiple days.
All right, I'll post that poll up while you answer the last one, Calvin. So if you want to quickly answer, everyone, do you use infinite scheduling, finite scheduling?
I love that we go for both. We don't limit it.
We go all the way to 11.
Until the front falls off.
We'll give it about another 20 seconds if you want to put your vote in.
Okay, Michael Gross has posted a comment here that he can get to split across shifts when using the MatTech scheduler, not the Epicor, and that it does work inside the MatTech scheduler. Thanks for
All
doing
right.
that, Michael. I did not put MatTech in the presentation here for capacity planning, but yes, this is now flowing into there, as well as the IoT with Azure and pulling real-time data from the machines back into Epicor. And then, hey, do I run the schedule multiple times a day?
I think you got one more question there, Calvin.
Awesome. Melissa has a suggestion that she uses finite and production infinite backwards in the test system to see overload hours. So she's actually running two databases for scheduling to see what the overload is going to be in an infinite world.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll here. I just got to grab the numbers just in case they don't show. And hit close. There we go. Share the results. So we've got 49% of the people who answered are doing infinite, 22 are doing finite, and 28 are going for a fun round of both.
And Michael, I think you'd have to log out and log back in for that type of change. I don't know if that would work any other way, because that's the place you enter the ID when you come in. Tom has a question here. How many hours are on each day from that spillover operation? There you would have to turn around and integrate with the job operation table, the calendar, to see what are the production hours, because if you're only available 10 hours, you would need to know that it starts at this time of day, ends at the calendar ending time of day, then picks up on the next day, the start hour and the ending hour. If it was split over 2 days, it would be the sum, but you would have to use the calendar to find out the stop and start time at the end of the day so that you could calculate how many hours were each day. And Matt's got a question here. For those that do manage successfully using finite scheduling, like to see a panel discussion on how they do this. How many schedulers does it take to manage finite scheduling? If you are using finite scheduling and are willing to do this, this is a great topic. I'd love to turn around and pull up an online discussion of finite scheduling versus infinite scheduling. If this is something that you're willing to do, go ahead and let myself or Fred know, and we'll go ahead and put this as a topic in an upcoming meeting.
I'll go hide. I believe you can go back to your screen now, Calvin.
Let me see. Is the presentation back up now?
Yep, sorry about that.
Awesome. Nope, not a problem. So 49% of the people are using infinite scheduling, 22% are using finite scheduling, and 28% go for both. So this would be a great topic if people would like to do this. If we can get some people willing to say, hey, we use this and we do it fairly well, by all means, let me know, and I'll put together a panel, or let me know if you guys are really good. We can have up to like 10, 15 people on the panel. It doesn't have to just be 2 or 3 people. So my queue time, my move time, I can specify the exact hours on my resource. Again, if the moving queue time adhere to the calendar, that's set up on the resource group, not necessarily on the resource. Give me 1 second here to get my screens back in sync. After the resource settings, we also need to take a look at the operations. Now, there are a couple types of operations: subcontract, internal, the machine MES or MatTech, or the IoT into Azure. So different operations could also be a field service operation or a service operation. Different types of operations also handle different scheduling. They can also have a rough cut code. Now, the rough cut horizon determines a point in the future when load is no longer being saved. Yes, the schedule will run, but we're not going to put the load on the resource because we know it's going to move after that point. I don't need the system to run that slow, putting all of those times on all of my resources. So it kind of speeds it up if I turn around and put a rough cut horizon, 4 months out in the future, or 6 months off in the future. My send ahead types are specified here on the operation. Am I going to be sending hours, pieces, or a percentage of the work forward to the next operation? So whenever I perform injection molding, well, once parts come off the machine, I can send them off to assembly. Do I do that based on the number of pieces that come out of the molder, or do I do that based on, hey, after it's run for an hour, we send a batch off to the next operation? When that schedule gets created, that schedule is more stair-stepped, overlapping, so that the operation can be completed ahead of schedule. My send ahead offset is going to be, what is that? So if I specify a send ahead type of percentage, my offset could be like 25%. So when 25% come off the job, move them forward. My offset, if I choose hours, put in a value of after 2 hours, offset value of 2, whatever parts we created in those 2 hours, move on to the next operation. The next is my capability that turns around and moves with this. And under my scheduling requirements, I have capabilities, resources, and resource groups. I generally recommend people to only pick one of the three, do not set up all three. If you turn around and pick multiples, different areas of Epicor are going to pull that multiple value based on how they were programmed. It doesn't necessarily always follow the same rule. So if I do job scheduling as an individual job, is it going to go to the capability? I generally say it's going to go from the tightest constraint down. So if I specify a capability, Epicor is going to schedule using that value first. If I specify a resource, it always goes to that machine. If I specify a group, then it's going to go look at all the resources in the group to find out where can it put that job. So capability is going to be kind of a skill or ability that the resource is going to have, whether that's a machine, a person, engineers. This is going to be capability scheduling, where I have to have this specific person or this specific resources available to do the work. A tip for those that are using that, this is going to be stored in the cap res link table. So I get a lot of questions for people that do try to write queries or take a look at their capability scheduling, and they can't figure out where that data is being stored because the data dictionary and the field help doesn't necessarily tell you on the screen. So the database table for that is the cap res link table. But think of this more as a human resource needed to schedule the work or someone specific to do the work. The resource would be the machine or a work center. The resource group would be, hey, anybody in here can do this. And I do still run across a lot of people that have one resource per group. If you have multiple resources that can perform the same function, you put those into a group so the system can load balance or schedule to the resource that's available. If we create one resource per resource group, when I call this in my engineering or link to the operation, it's only going to follow that one. It'll never look to any other machines unless someone manually goes in and alters the schedule. That may not be the best way to handle this. So the scheduling requirements is what defaults when the operation gets added to the job. And that's when Epicor goes out and says, hey, pull this resource, pull this capability. Again, try to limit this to one, not multiples, because depending on whether MRP did the schedule, the manual job scheduling did it, or global scheduling, may not always pick which one you were thinking if you're selecting multiples there. Simple one for subcontracting, and this is only available to add to the engineering workbench or the job operation and job entry, is the days out. And this is how long are the parts going to be out at the vendor before they come back and move on to their next sequence or move to the next vendor. I have seen a few times where people go from one subcontract to the other, but the days out needs to be understood so that Epicor says, okay, we're going to make the parts on Monday, ship it out for subcontract. It's going to be gone for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Then it comes back and can resume. So when it creates the schedule load, it doesn't even try to put the load for the next operation on Tuesday through Thursday. It's just going to leave it for Friday. Now it does default back to the start of the day. So I can't have anything at subcontract for literally like 2.5 days. Haven't seen this work yet. Even though it's a decimal in the days out, I haven't seen it work where it picks up mid-shift. Next one is my kind of the scheduling topics here. So we have global scheduling, which is going to calculate the scheduling order. There's a process that has to be run to calculate this. After we calculate it, we need to adjust what's in there, or we can take what Epicor created and just run with it. 9 times out of 10, I see people wanting to modify this or tweak a little before they do that. I have a question here from Jennifer Greendale. Is the days out in calendar days or business days? This is going to be on your calendar days. So if I have 3 days out, and I send it out for subcontract on a Friday, and Saturday and Sunday are not working days, it's going to go for Monday and Tuesday and then resume on Wednesday.
And is that the calendar on the supplier, your subcontractor?
Correct. So if I override my production calendar with a supplier specific calendar, it's going to follow that. So for global scheduling, there's not a whole lot to do. After I calculate it, I adjust it, then I just kick off the process. It allows you to reschedule all of your released and engineered jobs. If they are not released and engineered, Epicor is not going to schedule it. The finite capacity does not allow for load to be scheduled if it exceeds a resource's available capacity. As we mentioned earlier, if we use finite scheduling, you only get that many hours per day. The drawback with infinite, yep, you can turn around and have a whole lot of work scheduled on one resource that can't be done in one day. One thing I didn't mention is, can I have both? Ding, ding, ding. Nobody asked that question yet. And that's a yes. So can I trick the system and have 4 welders and then create a 5th fake welder where I want to put my overload that's infinite? So Epicor will schedule my first 4 welders, which are real resources. Then I can create a bogus resource being my 5th welder, and that's where it throws all of my infinite load to fit that. So you can have a hybrid of both in the event that, yeah, we have the ability to bring in more people or make more welders or add more resources into this area. So I can infinite schedule it, just don't overload me all the time on it. So I can turn around and kick off the global scheduling. This is awesome. This is what's normal in the system.
We have a question from Tom there, Calvin, before you go further. Will global scheduling run in backwards scheduling and show load in the past?
Only if I allow scheduling before today in company configuration. Otherwise, I'll handle that question with you, Tom, here in a few seconds. So my scheduling directions can be backward or forward. Backward schedule looks at the end date or the requirement date and says, okay, take the last operation, backward schedule it. Take the next operation, backward schedule it. Tell me when I need to release this job to make sure that it goes out on the day that it needs to go. That's a standard backward schedule from the requirement date. Forward scheduling is, hey, if I want to start this on August 20th, when can I have the parts off the lines? That's a forward scheduling where I specify a start date and a start time, and that's what moves forward. Now, there was a field under plant or site configuration where I could say schedule everything from, I think it defaults to 12 a.m. for backward scheduling. You can specify also a start time. What happens with Tom's question, we have forward and we have backward scheduling. Everything's fine and dandy until I run into a bounce condition. If I set up backward scheduling and don't allow the system to go back in time, Epicor is going to flip that job and forward schedule it. So it's going to backward schedule the operations, hit today and go, uh-oh, we can't make it. So then it reverses, gets rid of that schedule, takes that job and forward schedules it starting today. And then tells you, this job's going to be late, but it's going to be late by this many days because we can't backward schedule. They consider that a bounce condition. So I think that's what Tom was asking. If the job cannot be backward scheduled, Epicor is going to turn around, flip it, and forward schedule it. So our scheduling modifiers on the operations are finish to finish, finish to start, and start to start. Finish to start are operations performed sequentially. One happens, then the next, then the next, then the next. And you would think that would be logical for send ahead. No. Start to start is all operations start at the same time. And that's what you need to use for send ahead scheduling. Doesn't sound too intuitive there, but start to start says, hey, all the operations can start today. But send ahead turns around and looks and says, oh, this operation can finish here, or send these parts off ahead here, so move that operation to start here. That one's a little goofy. And then the other one is finish to finish, where all the operations finish at the same time. I will see most people using the finish to start, unless they're using send ahead, where I'll see start to start go into play, where the operations, they want the send ahead to turn around and calculate and move the parts through the plant floor, kind of the way that the operators are going to make the parts and move them through the plant. So global scheduling, I had mentioned we have to run that calculate process. It goes out and it will forward schedule each job using infinite capacity. The jobs will be assigned a priority sequence. That global scheduling order is out here and put in a queue for you to manage and maintain. That queue is available to modify here in the adjust global scheduling. So every job is going to be thrown out there based on its priority scheduling code. Is this a high priority? Is it normal? Is it low? Using different scheduling priority codes can also help. So maybe my inventory backflow, I make those a low priority. Customer orders are normal. Backlog items, those have to go to high. Or super important customers go to high schedule. That scheduling sequence, Epicor is going to do them based on the lovely 10 number sequence, like operation sequence 10, 20, 30. It's going to create the scheduling sequence. And the nice part about having 10, 20, 30 is I can take job number 80 here and move it over to 39 and now insert it. When Epicor runs the scheduling process after we adjust it, it's going to schedule those jobs. After it schedules number 30 here, it's now going to do 39, which was 80. So this job's going to happen fourth in the sequence before the one that's marked as 40. So I can turn around and see which jobs are going to get thrown at the available resource load and control which ones load my resources first. So my important jobs can go ahead of my regular and my inventory jobs. This global scheduling screen has a finite number of columns. There are a handful of posts out on the Epi user help on how to add a BAQ and add additional columns. I'll see people put clients' names into their scheduling order screen here. They'll put order number and date so that they can see this, or what is the product group. If you're missing additional information, this can be easily customized, and that's out on the Epi users portal for how to add a column to the grid. Adding a BAQ to it and then adding that column to it. This is not a complex customization to add here, but it helps you figure out which jobs need to go in which order a little quicker. Once that scheduling sequence is set, then I'm going to go ahead and run the process to have Epicor load those jobs and schedule them. The next time I run the calculate, it's going to reset all those values. So this is something that you have to maintain periodically, pretty much every time you run it. If you find that, hey, this is the order I like and it's the order I want to run for the next 2 weeks, go ahead and right-click, export it to Excel, and save the file. Then if I run calculate scheduling order, I can turn around and import these back, what were the original values, and put that in intermingled with what's out there. How do I do that? This job can be sequence 10. I can put another job also in sequence 10. They don't have to be different numbers. Now, the job number with the lowest value is the one that gets scheduled first. Epicor is going to turn around and look at the scheduling sequence to load the resources and fill capacity based on the scheduling sequence, but I have seen people turn around and put the same scheduling sequence number in here more than once. So again, we calculate the schedule order, Epicor goes out and pulls it and sets a default. Then we go in and adjust it in the adjust global scheduling, and then we run it. This can be done multiple times a week, or we can do it midweek and let MRP over the weekend handle the rest of them. Just depends on how you want to handle those. The other thing is, it does have to be an engineered and released job before it can even show up here. So, scheduling topics that we've got here is production load. Load is the amount of time required for the production to get the work done on the machine or the employee or the resource center, it doesn't matter. It's the amount of time that's required to complete that production or the amount of production that's needed to do the work. The scheduling blocks are going to tell us how many can we use at the same time. Now I may be able to do the operation in half or a third of the time if I increase the number of scheduling blocks. Production load would be the total hours that also remain on the operation. So if my load was relieved, as people are reporting their labor, my production load is going to shrink. My setup load is going to shrink. So if I have the system taking a look at this, it's also going to say, hey, I've already got 50% of the production done, so I only need 50% of the time remaining. So we've got a question from Jeff Davis here on the last slide. How does just global scheduling order get populated? When you run the calculate global scheduling, it should turn around and assign values based on the due date and the scheduling priority code that's on the job. Now, by default, most of them go in as normal, but if I have a job that I know is urgent or has to be run, it's an important customer, I may move the scheduling priority up higher. Or I know I have to have these sub-assemblies before another job can run, so I may want to move it higher in the priority. Epicor is going to look at that priority code and the due date for the job to figure out which ones need to go onto the resources and in what order. So my production load, my setup load, it's going to look to backward or forward scheduling or have my little bounce sit out there. Rough cut calculation scheduling. I can have MRP turn around and say, hey, go ahead and generate a job schedule, but don't put the load against the resources because it's really far out in the future. Don't take the time to go through all that, shortcut the process and move on to the next job. I don't need to necessarily finite schedule a resource 18 months out if I know in 90 days the whole schedule is going to wiggle. Probably don't need to go that far out. So I can put a rough cut horizon out there and do a rough cut scheduling code that says, hey, these operations, they're going to go this far out. These operations, they're going to go 12 months out. These are going to go 18 months out. So then I can turn around and kind of speed up the process when scheduling runs. Overloaded schedule. Oh, thank you. Didn't see that. Ooh.
And another one just popped in on you.
I
So
know,
Jeff Davis.
Move up.
Jeff Davis, I ran the calculate. I ran the calculate global, but there's nothing on the adjust screen.
Did the calculate global scheduling complete properly in the system monitor? Because if it ran, you should see the, okay, you said yes. You should see a sequence assigned to every job. And they have due dates, and the default scheduling also came in.
Screen on adjust is blank, no info.
Got it. So when your screen loads, go ahead and do a select. I'm going to back up a slide here. So on your adjust global scheduling, hit your binoculars or right click on the screen, go to options and say auto populate with all your jobs. By default, the screen pops up blank, kind of like with the job workbench. There was one of the workbenches, nothing shows up until you do the search. Same thing with production, PO suggestions. The screens come up blank. They're actually there. Just hit the binoculars or the search button. Overloaded, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I think you still got one left from Matt Heck here. My scheduling team is alleging that the shop load report doesn't accurately reflect partially completed operations. Say 50 out of 100 pieces have been reported for an operation, so theoretically only 50% of the estimated load should remain. They allege that 100% of the load still shows until the operation is actually marked complete. Can anyone else confirm or deny?
How did they select how load is completed? As long as they select how load is relieved, it should turn around and look at that by the scheduling engine for going forward. After you run the scheduling engine, that shop load should be updated.
And he said it's set to quantity in company config.
So when you run the scheduling engine again, it should update what the load is for the shop load tables. I would probably need to look if there's a conversion program for updating the load. I'm sure it's out there, so that it looks at how many pieces have been reported, where the job is based on either hours or quantity, and then updating what's the remaining load to update the system.
And then we've got one more from Bruce Larson. How does the schedule code come into play? Can't you have a priority code push the jobs to the beginning?
Yes, the scheduling priority code on the job entry screen, there is a scheduling priority code. When you set this up, you can say, hey, these are a level 1 priority. These are a level 5. These are a level 10. These are a level 999, which may be your immediate or high urgency jobs. When Epicor calculates the weighted value for that job to go into the scheduling order, it multiplies it by that scheduling code. Having a difference between a scheduling code of 5 and 6, it may not push that thing into the right schedule order. By separating the urgent to 999, you know that job's going to be higher on the list and come in as a, hey, schedule me first. If you turn around and set up your scheduling priority codes within 10, so 10, 20, 30, you should be totally fine. I would not recommend using astronomical numbers greater than 999, because when Epicor does the calculation of the math, that makes it a much larger number. You just don't want the system having to work with those. Again, the scheduling before today. Do we let the engine schedule before the start date of a job before today? And then we also have constrained materials. If I have a material that's defined as a constrained material, meaning I've got to have this available before issuing to the schedule or before issuing the schedule to that operation, the engine discovers, hey, it's a constrained material. Don't turn around, schedule it, or put it on a specific time. It's going to look for what are the settings on the part for having that material in and adhere to those. So if I have a lead time of 15 days on a material and I mark it as a constrained material and we don't have inventory, I can't schedule that to start tomorrow. It's got to start 15 days from today. So making sure that we have our settings is going to save us a whole lot of working hard. Kind of like our poor little cavemen here, round wheels would work a whole lot better on our little cart. Scheduling topics that we have here is going to be load leveling. And load leveling is kind of exactly what it says. Make sure that I balance the load across the day so that I know what jobs can be done in what order to account for all the time in the day. Jackie's got a question here. If we have to purchase material to the job, does scheduling engine take info into account the promise date from the PO? Nope. The promise date on the PO is when the vendor is going to promise you have it. That's not necessarily the date that the job operation is supposed to start that material is linked to. If you have a discrepancy where the supplier can't get the parts to you when that operation's needed to start, we need to let production know so they can reschedule because you just can't get that material in time. Epicor is going to assume that your purchasing department is going to bring the materials in for what the jobs are scheduled. Now, bless their pointy little hats in production, if they schedule a job that's before the lead time on a material, shame on them. They shouldn't be doing it. They should be following the lead time on it, or mark the material as a constrained material on the part setting. Epicor will follow that rule when it does its scheduling for you. So load leveling my jobs, I just want to make sure that when I schedule an 8-hour day, I don't have jobs overlapping. One finishes right after the other starts. I think I got that backwards. One starts right after the other one finishes. Locking the schedule is also important. So if I turn around and I create a schedule and I put it out there and, hey, I like the way this Monday is set, I can go ahead and right click on those jobs or mark those jobs and lock their schedule. Once I get that out there, I can lock the schedule. Now when the scheduling engine runs again, it's not going to move them. Now in detriment to that, you're not going to move it either, because once you lock a job, you can't drag and drop it on the board anymore. You have to unlock it to move it around again. Epicor also added in these later versions multi-job scheduling. And this is an option where I can schedule a group of associated jobs as if they were one job. So if I have a job family where I need to make all these sub-assemblies and then I need to make their sub-assemblies under them, I can turn around and do a multi-job schedule that moves them all as one, not the individual pieces where I have to move them all one by one, which is what everyone did in version 9 and earlier. Sequential jobs is where we produce parts in a linear order. I got to have this part done before I can go on to the next one. Typically, the jobs are sequential in the system, so this is what the default is. That's not always the case for everybody. So just knowing this is the default, the jobs are sequential, you have to have A done before you move on to B, before you move on to C. The available to promise and the capable to promise are two different things here. Available to promise is a calculation that places the total demand for a part on a specific date against the supply available at that same date. That's my available. So depending on the demand required and the supply available on the ATP, total quantity is either a positive or a negative value from the quantity needed on that date. So my available to promise is how many you're going to have. Capable to promise is going to go look at the date, look at the current load and the schedules, and tell me when can I have the parts.
We have one more question, Calvin. Do you know where multi-job scheduling is located?
Well, that's easy, Troy. I do. You don't. But okay. Enough joking here. Actually, I have that in one of the schedules screenshots up ahead. The multi-job scheduling is on your job manual schedule. There is also a multi-schedule capability when you drag and reschedule an operation in the drop-down on job scheduling to choose, am I moving this assembly? Am I moving this family of jobs? Am I moving this branch, this subsequent group? This used to be a drop-down of 3 or 4 options. I want to say there's now like 7 or 8 options in that drop-down. It's on the right-hand side bottom of the screen when you go to reschedule an operation manually. So my available and my capable to promise are two different things here. One tells me, do I have it, yes or no, and how many will I have? The other one tells me, when can I have these based on the current load? MRP is out here, MPS is out here. Well, it doesn't really hit the capacity planning. These are processes that run in the system if you purchase the material requirements planning module. And MRP, it's going to do a calculation and process for all the parts that are marked, process MRP, and then fill order and job demands with an MRP job. The master production schedule is going from a different perspective. This is taking a fixed part and quantity and blocking chunks of the schedule to handle that master production load. The last one for our scheduling topics here is our Kanban jobs. And while Kanban's type of a just-in-time manufacturing, I look at Kanban as a simple way to make a job, backflush all the labor, backflush the material, put the parts in inventory, and I don't have to have production manage those jobs. So if I have a tote of parts that's managed visually, and hey, we're always supposed to have 10 in here, and when we get down to 5, someone sends a card over to the operator and says, hey, make me 5 more for this tote. When the operator reports it, I don't need to issue the materials because Epicor is going to create a job for that Kanban entry. It's going to turn around and issue the materials, backflush the labor for the person that reported the quantity. It's going to put the parts into inventory at the location that person reported in the Kanban receipt entry. It's going to complete and close that Kanban job in the background. So do I need to bother a production team to manage components that are used through the manufacturing process if these are simple? I've also seen people use Kanban jobs to handle their sales kits. Where, hey, I kind of need a sales kit item, but I hate using Epicor sales kits, so they'll use a Kanban job to go out, create them, backflush them, issue them, and when they receive that Kanban item, the parts show in inventory and can now be shipped on the sales order. And Bruce is also mentioning there's a multi-job scheduling setting on site maintenance. So not in the site configuration, but on the site maintenance. Okay, there's my spinning guy that's trying to level my jobs out. And here on the job scheduling board, this is where the bulk of, hold on 1 second, got a question here. Is Kanban job similar to job entry? It'd be more closer to quick job entry, Casey, because it's going to create the job, backflush everything to it, complete and close it. Job entry, you're making the job, then you have to run it through engineering, releasing, pulling in the details, scheduling it, printing a traveler, or having someone go do the work and then reporting it, and then you have to manually complete and close it. A Kanban job, all of those processes are done in the background by the system.
And Calvin, just so you know, you're at quarter till. I know you have more to do. Just want to make sure that you're wrapping up by 11.
Yeah, we're going to run a little, possibly over here. So our job scheduling board, I'm going to put in my job number, my project. After I enter that, I can go over to the schedule tab and see, hey, this is what my job is going to look like. This is where it's scheduled at, what days it's going to be performed on. My moving queue time is going to show up here as either teal in the front for my queue time, or I think the default is like a fuchsia color for the move time at the end of the operation. You can drag and drop any unlocked operations or unlocked jobs and put them into the schedule where you want them. Once that job is out there and you get everything set up on this job scheduling board, you can either accept the changes from the actions menu or undo them. So once you accept it, Epicor is going to update my capacity plan and my load with where you put this job. You can actually also save and restore these. So I can save the schedule and say, hey, this is Calvin 1, and I think it works out really well. Then go schedule other jobs or other resources, and then take a look at how it impacts with them. When you get it to be, hey, I like Calvin 1 across everything, then you pull those schedules up and can save them. So you can do this in a what if kind of mode with multiple schedules just by giving them names. The other thing that I can do for my job scheduling board is go to my load graphs directly from the actions menu and, hey, go show me what's going on here. And yes, while you can print it, I try to recommend people don't print, save the trees, and the second you print it, it's out of date because someone didn't show up to work and now I've got to move that operation. So Kevin Burrow has a question. When using load level feature, does that take into account other operations? It load levels the job or load, not the job, the resource group or the resource that you're scheduling. It's not going to take into account the other operations. It's going to load level the resource that you're on. And Matthew has a question here for a part marked as constrained and the park master is only scheduling via MRP affected for jobs. And manual scheduling a job is unaffected. Basically, scheduling still allowed to say, I'm smarter than the system and schedule the job that doesn't have the necessary material. When you manually schedule the job, I would almost say look in the log file to see if it paid attention to the constrained material for that version. If you have a constrained material, the log file is going to make an entry for this. Just opening the log file in a text editor and doing a search for the word constrained. definitely add that in there to make sure that, yes, I can go ahead and see these. Scheduling tools beyond the job scheduling board is going to be the resource scheduling board. I can pull up the scheduling board for a specific piece of equipment or for a group of equipment. The start date and end date always default to a month. If you have a lot of jobs out there, you may want to change this default before you pick a resource or resource group. Epicor will open much faster if you're looking at a smaller set of the data for your scheduling board. If you do need a month or 2 months, by all means, you can go ahead and do this. Just pay attention. If you have a lot of jobs, it can slow the system down. The other thing that you get from this resource scheduling board is a list view. The list view shows you all the jobs that are scheduled to be performed at that resource group or resource. Jinkies, it's also your priority dispatch. We can sort these by the start date and start time, and now I have a complete list of what jobs need to be worked on. This list view should match what's on the work queue in MES. Same as the job, once I turn around and move jobs around on my board, on my schedule, I can accept them, undo them. This is where I can load level the resource group, and that will turn around and say, this job finishes at 2 p.m., this one starts at 2:01 p.m. The additional feature that we have here, and let me see here, I think I put that in my notes, batching requires APS. But if your company is trying to do lean manufacturing and I have to, I have multiple parts that are going to be cut, multiple jobs that are needing this, I can look at the cutting resource and say, hey, batch all of these jobs together and we're going to cut them all on one sheet of material rather than cut each one on its own sheet. So I can batch these jobs together and link them. So in here, there's a column for batching. Once you select what jobs you want to batch, maybe by like material, then you go up to the actions menu, tell the system to batch it. Epicor creates a batch job for these. Now the operator clocks into the batch job. When they report the piece is done, Epicor distributes the materials and labor to all the jobs that were batched in the batch. So kind of a lean manufacturing initiative, but it does require the APS module so that you can do this type of scheduling or batching for lean. The site schedule load graph is going to show me my shop load. My load entities are going to be in here. My load group supply is over on the top right. And then my actual capacity and load is shown in the grid. In the sample database that I was playing around with, I did not have the process run and had a little trouble with the server the other night getting this one to load and populate correctly. In addition to my site loads schedule load graph, I have a resource. This one ran without a problem. The resource schedule load graph is going to, hey, I can pick what department I want, what resource group or resource group and department or the resources. Then see the load by that group, the department load detail that's out there, a resource group load or a resource load, and see exactly how did I overload these machines? Am I doing okay? These scheduling tools are under the scheduling module. I want to say general operations. Some are also loaded under executive analysis. There is also the overload informer. If we select on that operation or on that resource, yes, inform the overload when we hit 10% over. It's going to make an entry into the overload system telling us that, hey, I got a job that needs 30 hours and I'm over capacity by 10 hours. Let's go back a page there. So it's going to tell me what is my overload that's going on out there. Now, if it's overloaded by 1 hour, maybe I had my percentage set so small so it didn't need it. So my overload informer can also look at what if schedules. So if I run Calvin 1, my what if schedule, I can see that, hey, I screwed up and I put a lot of overload out there. So I may want to go in, pull that schedule up and delete the what if. I don't want it. So saving my resource load, I can turn around, pull those up, create them, and then save that resource load for a date range or a list of jobs. I can also specify how many processors are involved in this so that it doesn't have to do one job after the other. It can do multiple jobs, kind of like when MRP runs, I can tell it how many processors and schedulers to run. I can do the same thing when I go to save resource load into the system by telling it how many to run against. If I have 3,000 jobs to load balance, well, if I run 3 processors, each processor is going to take 1,000 jobs each. So the process will run a whole lot quicker. Do not select more processors than you have CPUs on your server, because that will actually start slowing the process down rather than speeding it up. Our priority dispatch report. Operations per resource group, operations starting on or before. And then my other parameters here for the report that's coming out. Do I want to see materials? Do I want page breaks? Do I want scheduled resources? This is pretty standard. While the report is kind of difficult, I'll find most people go in and whittle a lot of pieces off of it just so they can have a production by department. This is what you end up giving out. If I do a new page between resource, I can just print this out and hand it out at the beginning of the day. Here's for the supervisors. These are the jobs that need to run through to. That priority dispatch should match all of the jobs that are in your system. It should also match that work queue. So the schedule impact report, this is going to look at the effect of different schedule dates on current jobs. If you want to compare early, late, or on-time jobs between the actual and what-if schedules, I can look at that schedule impact report. Don't have a lot of people utilizing this. If I had enough time to do all the what-if schedules as well as maintain the current schedule, I'd be doing great. Most people don't have that many schedulers or production people to manage that. The shop load report. I can turn around and print the load for every operation that's scheduled within a resource group. This load report is going to tell me the hours that are consumed and the hours that remain, either by week, by day, what's my interval, and it's going to tell you when do you have an overload. If I look at this as a weekly bucket, okay, I'm doing fine for the next 2 weeks, but then I hit an overload. It's going to tell you how many hours are put there. Now, if that overload is past your horizon for finite, that should be normal because that's when the equipment went back to an infinite state. The report does add the setup load and the production load together for each operation, so it's not separate for each one. Some of the tools that Epicor gives us here is our scheduling, is our shop tracker. This is a great tool for telling you, hey, who's here, who's not here, what jobs or what resources are in use, which ones are not in use. It also shows me the shop warnings. Shop warnings can be set up to, hey, send an alert out when somebody is clocking into an operation where the previous op is not complete, or they're working on an operation that doesn't have material issued to it. These warnings are going to show up here. There is a setting in the company configuration for, I believe on the MES tab, for how many weeks of shop warnings to keep. By default, Epicor, I think, defaults 60 weeks. That's probably a whole lot more than you're ever going to remember. Normally, I'll recommend keep shop warnings for like 3-4 weeks. If you can remember what you did last week, awesome. If you can remember what you did a month ago, I'll be amazed. But keeping those shop warnings, you shouldn't need them for 60 weeks. If we didn't address that shop warning when the problem occurred, we got bigger fish to fry than trying to remember what we were doing a year ago. The other one is a subcontract shipment tracker, and I didn't really put that in here. It's the same as subcontract shipment entry, but it does allow you to know what was sent out to the vendor and what's been received and what are we still waiting on. If I send 1,000 parts out for heat treat and only got 950 back, where are my other 50 pieces? That subcontract shipment tracker will still show that. Now, it's not going to update the days out schedule for planning, but it's something that you should still take a look at to make sure that, yes, subcontractors are meeting their dates. The scheduling logs was a question that someone had entered in the first part of the session. And I was saying I wanted to get to it before we kind of ran out of time here. The scheduling logs, there's a standard, there's extended, there's very verbose. In that company config, we talked about doing the extended log. We also talked about doing the include extra details, and that makes your log file much, much larger. The log types, there's a scheduling log, there's an MRP log, there's an MRP processes log. In 2022 moving forward, when I run a job schedule, it's going to create a log just for scheduling that one job. So whether I run MRP, I run the calculate and run the whole global scheduling process, or I schedule one log, I'm going to get a log file. Those log files are in your server Epicor data folder. This should be shared to the network people within your organization so that they can get to these logs and see them. Those code words, and sorry, Matt, I didn't have that in there, but constrained would be the other code word I would add here for searching. If I search for the word error, it's going to tell me where the system had an error, scheduling or creating that job. If I look for the word cannot, it's going to tell you where the job cannot meet its due date or cannot be performed. These are key buzzwords to look for in the log. And Matt, for you, the word constrained would also be in there because that does get added to the log when it goes and looks at a constrained material. Going through these scheduling logs is crucial. Most people I know will turn around and have their IT department create a PowerShell script that moves a copy of the logs over to the scheduler's computers, or put it to a location where the scheduler doesn't have to go hunting through the server to find it. They're automatically either emailed to them or sitting at their fingertips, because if you're not reviewing these log files, you've assumed that Epicor is going to work perfectly out the box, and we all know that is not going to happen. But you need these log files so that you can see what the system did do and how to fix it. So basic job scheduling, hey, this is where that schedule multi-job checkbox is. So I can turn around and say, yes, schedule multi-job or schedule the whole family. When you run the job schedule from job entry, this is the screen you're prompted with. You can go forward or backward. If you backward schedule and it cannot be done before today, and we don't allow scheduling in the past, Epicor is going to create that bounce condition and then flip the job and forward schedule it. I do have options here on the side to ignore those material constraints, force a finite capacity, put this in a what if mode. Recalculating yield, while that's not necessarily going to change our capacity calculation process, I can have it also take a look at that. The minimize WIP is one that I get an awful lot of questions on. And this is minimizing how long the job is out on the plant floor. Do I want it to schedule the job to start today, then pick up again in October, then pick up again in November, then finish next January? Or do I want the job to be released in December to finish in January? If I say minimize WIP, Epicor scheduling engine is going to try and run this job all together, not spread out over time. Dan Ramirez is saying for global scheduling, it's showing him unfirmed jobs. Is there a setting to only show firm jobs? I would think that you can turn around and pull those out just by doing a filter on your scheduling, the column for the job number. Your unfirmed job should be prefixed with MRP or whatever you put for your MRP prefix. I would just add that to a filter there on the global scheduling, the adjust global scheduling order.
Okay, Calvin, how much more have you got? You're 5 minutes over already.
Yeah, let me take a look here. So lean manufacturing concepts, we already talked about job batching. There are production activity plans in the system where I can say, Monday I'm going to do this, Tuesday I'm doing this, Wednesday I'm doing this, and then build, this is my weekly plan. Then I turn around and work the plan, not the individual jobs in it. That sounds fine and dandy until some material doesn't show up and I can't work the plan anymore. Now I got to break the week, break the day, go back to the day that had the problem, reschedule that job, and then rebuild my plans. If I don't have any material problems or I don't have downtime from machines or people never call in sick, production plans and production activity planning works great. If you have any of those other problems, this is probably not the tool to be using. And the final one was that Kanban. So if I have a Kanban job, Epicor does give you a Kanban monitor that will go out and say, hey, you're short 5 of these pieces, go make more of them based on your inventory settings. Even though it's not an MRP managed job, it's still going to show up as a Kanban. Those Kanban jobs or parts that you set up for Kanban are not going to show in your capacity plan. These are jobs that get created on the fly when the operator reports they made the pieces. So your capacity calculation is going to be skewed a little if you're using Kanban jobs out there. Those areas you're going to need to make sure that you manage, and those resources or areas can't really be part of your capacity plan. That being said, I think we're kind of at the end. We talked about relieving load. When your desk is clear, you just push everything off to the side and it's all done. And then we just do completion and closing. If you do not complete the job, once you complete it, that takes it off of the shop load in the plan. Closing the job is a financial process. Completing says, I'm done with it on the plant floor. Take the load off the resources. Take the material requirements out of purchasing. I'm done with this. Or production is done with it. There are some past versions of Epicor where when you completed a job, it didn't complete all the operations and it left them out on the shop load. There are some conversion programs that will go clean these up if you migrated your database from old versions up into 10. You could have some shop load from years gone by that is still sitting out there because they never got marked complete. Those operations are still open, even though the jobs are marked complete. So do yourself a favor, go hunt if you have any operations that were not marked complete by an upgrade. Go in and run those conversions to complete those and get those out, because some of those are still showing up on your load reports. Once you get those out and you complete those jobs, they're gone. They're off of your plan. Now what I have on the plan are my true jobs that should be the load that's assigned to my resources. Sorry for running a little over, but I knew it was there's no way to get all the way through this.
Okay, if people have questions, go ahead and put those in chat and we'll do those with Stump the Chump. That way we can jump over to Mike since he's on.